Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the Under One Roof Landlord and Letting Agent webinar series for 2021. I'm Mike Heffron, Chief Executive of Under One Roof Scotland. Most of you will be aware of the work Under One Roof does to support landlords, letting agents, owner-occupiers, factors, and local authority housing officers and others throughout the sector with issues around owning and maintaining a tenement flat. However, what you may not know is that in the last year, through the generous funding of Safe Deposit Scotland's Charitable Trust, the Scottish Government and local authorities throughout Scotland, we have attained charity status. With staff dedicated to working with landlords and owner-occupiers, we are expanding our operations to provide even more support for tenement owners and those that work alongside them through interactive webinars such as these. In the coming months and years, Under One Roof will be increasing the free independent information available on our website, our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts, and through our monthly newsletter, which you can sign up to at Under One Roof Scot. Today, we'll launch our landlord webinar series with a session on noise reduction. The webinar will feature 3 pre-recorded videos on various issues related to noise reduction in tenement flats and what can be done about it, followed by a question and answer session. The videos will last about 25 minutes total, leaving us with plenty of time for us to get to your questions. We encourage you to enter your questions into the webinar's Q&A chat room as the videos play, and then we'll ask those questions after the videos conclude. If you're having any difficulty with the webinar software, we first encourage you to refresh your browser. If that doesn't solve the problem, though, please send us a question in the main chat room, and we'll see what we can do to help you out. If you're a housing professional looking to use the webinar towards your CPD, we'll be posting a link to the CPD recording page in the chat room later in the webinar. And finally, before we begin, I'd like to thank Safe Deposit Scotland Charitable Trust for the funding that has made this and all of our landlord webinars possible, and Annie Flint, who has provided the Under One Roof team support and guidance throughout the planning of the webinars. Now, we'll begin with with a presentation from John Gilbert. John is a leading authority on sustainable design in Scotland with over 44 years' experience as a practicing architect. He pioneered working with communities with Assist Architects, and with co-author Annie Flint, wrote the Tenement Handbook, which now forms the backbone of our website. John continues to encourage tenement owners to learn how important maintenance is, and in his retirement continues to illustrate and help provide information for our website. So without further ado, we'll play the video from John.
Hi, I'm John Gilbert from Under One Roof, and today's webinar is on noise problems in tenements. Our noise or noise nuisance really affects people's mental health, and it's increasingly a problem in Scotland in older tenements. Now, I'm going to talk you through some of the issues with older tenements today. It can emanate obviously externally from a number of sources like aircraft noise, traffic noise, barking dogs and that sort of thing. And that comes in through windows mostly. That's airborne, and there's limits of what you can do to control it. You can have noise barriers if you're beside a road, but otherwise it's really traveling through there, so you have to protect it through the windows. Now, there's different ways of doing that. I mean, a single glazed window won't have that much effect. If it's secured, sealed, it'll be better than an opening single glazed window. And a double glazed window will have a slight improvement, but not much. Surprisingly, because the 2 panes of glass are usually the same thickness, there's not usually much of a difference, because basically the vibrations transmit from one pane to the next. Obviously you can get double glazed acoustic windows so that one of the panes is basically got a membrane down the middle of it, so it's a thicker glaze, so you've got 2 different sheet thicknesses of glass in the window. That's important. But the space between the glass is also important, and that's why secondary glazing is the best way. You can improve the sound resistance by as much as 20 decibels with secondary glazing. So I would advise you, if you've got an airborne problem to fit secondary glazing. Obviously, you'll need to improve ventilation. You can get acoustic ventilators to fit into the wall if this is the case. And you can still open windows, obviously, but you'll lose the effect of sound resistance in the windows. However, most of what I'm going to talk about today is impact noise and airborne sound in flats. It travels through walls and floors. You'll notice it because of footfall on floors, particularly where people have put laminate flooring down and people are not changing into slippers. They use hard shoes, so you walk across the floor above, or even coming up the close, you can hear the sound of people walking up the close. And then there's just noise from a vibration like music, live music, as well as video and recordings that can be played far too loudly, and that transmits through the floor as well as the walls through vibrations. Noise between flats can emanate from a range of sources. We've talked about the obvious ones: barking dogs, music and parties, loud voices, DIY work, and footfall. So this is categorized as airborne or impact and has to be measured differently. Airborne travels through the air. Impact sound when one object hits another, so anything hit over the floor. And of course you get that in traditional tenements. So you get it in the walls and you get it in the floors. Now let's start with the floors and how they are constructed. Well, in Glasgow, the floor has a deafening material, an ash deafening material, usually about 70mm, which is laid on deafening boards set between each joist. And then the plaster, which is maybe lath plaster or plasterboard, underneath, which is nailed directly to the underside of the joists. This is okay and is usually satisfactory, provided there are cornices still intact and that the ash deafening is still there. However, if you're in Edinburgh, it's slightly different. There's the ash deafening. If you're Edinburgh, this is the makeup where you've still got ash deafening, but the underside is suspended on timber hangers. So there's a bigger void between the floor joist and the ceiling, and that helps to some degree with impact noise. So that is meant to be slightly better, but you can still get problems in Edinburgh tenements. The main problem is when you get plumbers and electricians and maybe DIY enthusiasts ripping up floors to expose the old deafening. And here you see the deafening with pipes going in. And really it's important to make sure the deafening is replaced with something akin to deafening. I'll come into that later. If you've got a flood, then it's likely that the deafening has been removed in order to dry out the surrounding joists. So if you've got a noise problem and you've had floods in the past, then you really need to check what it's like underneath the floor. Too often you get people putting in glass wool in between the joists to replace the deafening, the original deafening. Now the deafening provided a mass which was good at preventing the transmission of impact noise. And if that goes, the glass wool really has no effect. So it's not a very good sound insulator. There are some acoustic insulants which are like glass wool, which are better at acoustic insulation. And here you can see at a bay window where the ash deafening is removed, you can see the deafening boards, and that should be replaced with new deafening. But sometimes it's completely removed, maybe because of rot, and the need to get access into the spaces and replace the ceilings as well. In that case, they might do something fairly radical. This is really only the sort of thing that happens in full-scale tenement rehabilitation works, where you get a floating floor on top. And this is really another floor which helps to reduce impact noise. So it's on maybe hush battens or a foam resilient layer, and then inside the space between the joists might be filled with an acoustic insulation, and then the ceiling might be fixed with instead of directly to the joist, to resilient bars, and then to the joist or to the resilient bars. So that gives you some separation between the new plaster ceiling and the joists. Not much, and it's quite difficult. So sometimes additional acoustic layers of plasterboard are added, and obviously sometimes a complete layer has been added as well. Now here's a picture of a floating floor. You can see what I mean, where you get these carriers for the battens, which help to reduce impact noise. And here are some of the various pieces. The resilient bar, which isolates the ceiling from the wall, and again sometimes used on walls as well. Hush buttons for the floors, and then the bottom left is a different type of resilient bar fixed to the joists. In full rehab, you might get something like this, where a new floor is put on top of the existing joists with resilient membrane directly over the joists, and the floorboard is not actually nailed to the joists. And then the deafening is replaced with limestone chippings, in this case a material known as Quiatex, which is used quite commonly. And then maybe 2 layers of plasterboard, probably really that's required for fire insulation as much as anything else, but it does improve sound insulation. The space at the edge between the wall and the first joist is rather narrow, and that has to be filled with some sort of acoustic insulant. And then a suspended ceiling, either a suspended ceiling like this one, which creates a void, and which that void can also have acoustic insulation, or a completely independent ceiling is sometimes done. So these are different options, but you can actually reinstate traditional floors the way they were, which can still perform quite adequately. Now walls are slightly different, because you get these fairly thin walls in tenement construction. Half brick walls are 4.5 inches, or at least they're about 5 inches thick. The brick is 4.5 inches thick, and these occur at the close walls, the party walls between you and your neighbour's flat, and the party walls on the other side, at least in some part of the walls, in the bed recess particularly, behind old openings and stoves, and in presses. If you take away the timber of a wall press in the front living room, you often find the bricks are placed on edge and not fully mortared, so sound can travel through these gaps in the mortar quite easily. So presses are vulnerable to sound transmission. And of course, flanking sound will hit a wall and then travel up to the neighbouring wall. Now, there's not a lot you can do apart from making sure that the gap between the joist and the wall is sealed at this point, and using acoustic feelers. Ideally, having the cornices reinstated can also help. And like this. So this is an important area, because it's often got a void and the cornices have been removed. So that's about it for noise nuisance.
Thanks, John. John will be joining us live a bit later to answer your questions. And we did have a question about someone asking if the slides would be made available. I'll speak with John during the next video and see if that's the case. But to let you know also that this video will be up on our YouTube site. Probably we'll get it up there tomorrow. So if there's anything you've missed and want to go back and take a look at or take a closer look at those slides, you can do that off of our Under One Roof Scotland YouTube page. Next up is an interview conducted by our new communications officer, Jazz Brogden, with David and Alan Barber from DB Acoustics in Glasgow. Now, DB Acoustics is one of just a number of firms that conduct noise tests for flats, but they were generous enough to give us their time and thoughts about about the issue around noise testing. And they're going to go over now the requirements, the equipment they use, and the benefits of sound testing.
In terms of the requirements, I think the main thing is we need power on in the flat or wherever we're testing for the equipment. Usually, if we're doing it for the impact test, the floor has to be a bare floor. It can't be done on carpet. So that's one thing to bear in mind. For the airborne test, kind of what we do is this is a piece of equipment we use. It's a 12-sided speaker or a dodecahedric speaker, and we use that to generate the noise for the airborne test. So we generate a noise maybe about 110, 115 decibels and measure the noise in the source room. And then we go down or through the wall on the other side of the wall or floor that we're measuring and measure the source level. And essentially what it is, it's the reduction in noise between the source room and the quiet room. It gives you a level difference, and the higher the number or the higher the difference between the two sides, the better the performance of the wall or the floor for the airborne test. And then for the impact test, we've got a machine, a tapping machine, and it's basically got 5 hammers that it drops in sequence. And it's a set weight, a set height that it drops from, and a set number of drops. So it's all standardized to a specific ISO British standard. And we put that on the floor upstairs, switch it on, go down into the room below, and just measure the level of noise in the room below with the machine working. And in that case, the lower the level you record, then the better the performance of the floor for that test.
I think we should also mention is, from what Alan was saying, is that occupants should realise that you need access to both sides of the floor. Or if you're testing a wall, you need access to both sides.
Yes, both sides, your neighbour.
One occupant and a neighbour they've fallen out with, and you want to do tests on the wall or the floor, then someone will need to agree access with the neighbour as well. It can't be done from one side. It has to be done from both sides.
So is a sound test really the only effective way of knowing how bad the sound insulation is in a flat?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to answer that? I would have to answer in 2 ways, John. One, I'd have to answer that yes, there is, mainly because the sound tests are carried out to a defined, recognised standard, and as such, they are repeatable. So you can do a pre-test on the floor, do it to a standard, and try and improve the floor, go back and do a retest, and it means you can have complete confidence in comparing the retest with the pre-test. So they're repeatable. Also, the test is independent of the occupants as well. It would tend to be done when the occupants are not in the affected rooms. So that's another point. It's worth mentioning as well that sound testers are accredited to carry out tests, usually by SIPMA. What's that? I think it's the Sound Insulation and Measurement Association. Yeah, the Association of Noise Consultants, and also UCAS. So there are various accreditation bodies that testers are allowed to carry out tests in a legal manner. Another thing is that all the measurement equipment, like tapping machine plus the sound level meter, are all calibrated and have to be sent away to a calibration laboratory in order to give confidence in the measurement results. But another point, the last point, the thing is that tests are able to stand scrutiny in a court of law
Right.
if it goes to court.
Thanks. That was obviously John, not Jazz. Jazz is going to be taking part in the next interview, the final video of the night. And if there was a question, that was DV Acoustics out of Glasgow. But like I said, it was just one of the organizations that do that kind of work. So our final video of the night is an interview conducted with David Duffy, the divisional officer working for South Lanarkshire Council and trustee for the Royal Environmental Health Institute of Scotland. David will cover a number of aspects of noise, that is, of noise between tenants and what to do about that. He's the lead for all aspects of noise enforcement for South Lanarkshire Council and has over 30 years enforcement experience in the local authority. And he will be joining John after the video concludes to take your questions.
Hi everyone, it's Jasmine here from Under One Roof, and I am joined by David Duffy from the Royal Environmental Health Institute of Scotland. We're here today to have a chat about noise, what are the common types of noise complaints, how to carry out a sound test, and I'm going to get straight into it. So could you tell me, what are the commonest types of noise complaints?
The most common complaints that we get within local authorities, which is where environmental health officers work, is antisocial behaviour noise complaints. Now, antisocial behaviour noise complaints can range from a party, a stereo, a telly, a guitar, right up to a barking dog, to basically a behavioural aspect of someone living in a neighbouring property that you don't like the way that they're doing it, not considerate of your enjoyment of your house. They're the most common types of complaints, but obviously environmental health get lots of different types of complaints as well. Things like road traffic noise experience within a property, or construction noise, or industrial or entertainment noise affecting the property that you live in. So yeah, antisocial behaviour noise tends to be the most frequent type of complaint referred to ourselves to get involved with, but there are a range of other ones as well.
That's great. So how big of a problem is it in older Victorian tenements?
Tenements have some unique characteristics, and that the shape, design and use of them often isn't as it was originally built, and also the adaptations, modifications, expansions, divisions into multiple houses, all of these things have had an impact on the types of noise complaint and also the expectations of those who live within those houses. Now, between one tenemental block and the next tenemental block, you don't tend to get noise issues because the walls are like a metre or a metre and a half thick, very, very, very wide, and not much noise can travel through that unless there's actually a big hole or there's a gap for someone to get through. However, within next door type ideas, up, down, left or right, there is the potential for noise issues to arise.
If a tenant does complain, what are the first steps you take? So when should you be calling an environmental health officer?
Well, recognising that the audience today is likely to be landlords or letting agencies or property owners who are interested in tackling noise issues, either that they're accused of or their tenants are accused of, or that they're suffering from, as in their tenants are suffering from, the way that most environmental health officers look at it is they have a complaint address, which is where the person who's been affected by the noise lives, and a concern address, and that's the one that the alleged noise is coming from. Now, I would say before you get environmental health officers involved, because we are criminal legislation we use, not to band it around, but we're probably the noise police in terms of that level of responsibility or authority. And when we get asked to get engaged, whilst we can use all the mediation and discussion and kind of lower informal means to try and find a remedy, often if we arrive on someone's doorstep, there's an instant defence, a wee bit like why have the police turned up at my front door, or why is somebody asking. So I would say at the very outset that you try to hear what the complaint and concern issues are, what their expectations are, and what is the root cause of why someone is experiencing that noise. Very often is the case where it's a lifestyle clash within flatted properties or four in a block where, you know, tenement or a brand new flatted property that was built in the the 70s or the 60s, and it's been the same neighbours in the 4 in a block for 40 odd years, 50 years, and they've all grown up together and they all know each other and they've got a way of communicating. Then when you get private lets and it's short-term leases and 6 months changeover and it's a new tenant that's moving in every single time, and you have the person that lives in the neighbouring property who's next to this is basically frustrated because every 6 months there's a new tenant coming in and they're having to re-explain that they don't work they work night shifts and have to get sleep during the day. And it's that communication part at the outset that I would encourage any property owner or the person, the tenants themselves, to do. And when environmental health officers come in, whilst they'll listen to what someone's expectation is in terms of quietness or permissions to party, what we do is we use the common man theory, and the common man is what would be reasonable to the common man. If you were in a court of law, what could you describe and explain to a judge that that's unreasonable to expect that person to tolerate? So my advice, certainly before you engage the more the criminal legislation, which again is what environmental health are there to do, protect public health through criminal legislation, try and see whether there's a way to get a resolution informally, because an agreement between two parties can get revisited. When we tend to get involved in it, it tends to be more an instruction or a direction. As long as we could prove that that's the case, we could serve a nuisance notice on that person and say, you can't do this. And then they would be breaching that and end up in court if they did breach that nuisance notice. So
can an environmental health officer oblige owners to carry out physical treatments to the building to reduce noise?
They can, yes. If the root cause of the nuisance, i.e. the noise being experienced, is because of, say for instance, a design or an adaptation error, or it's not been built correctly, or because of the way that the person is operating it. Very often in the historical properties, tenemental properties, the adaptations or the defect that's occurred is probably not by the person who is now the new owner. For instance, if you've had a flood or a bathroom is basically wiped out the ceiling below you, it's probable that the deadening was washed through too. So the sound insulation layer that was there has been wiped out. Now you then buy the house, you refit it, you put a new floor in and you put a bathroom in, but you don't reinstall the deadening because you didn't know it was there, because you could see right through the flat downstairs. Only then when you're running on the shower and people say, I can hear you singing in the shower downstairs because that sound insulation. Well, that wasn't your fault as such. You've bought the property as it was. And then it becomes a legal argument to go back to the previous owners to say, well, that's the design fault. And okay, how do we fix that to stop the issue if it is an issue? Noise operates as a wave, a bit like light. And if you shine light on a wall and there's a tiny hole in that wall, on the other side of the wall you get lots of light. Well, noise is exactly the same, in that if there's a breach on what it was that was stopping that noise travelling through, a pipe, a cable, cornicing missing at the edges of scaffold, of plasterboards or the edges of walls, if that's been removed, all it needs is a tiny gap and that noise will get round that corner and be experienced almost as loud as it was within the other property. So being able to instruct a specific repair because you've been the root cause, as a property owner, for a defect in a property is a hard thing to do, or a hard thing to pin down to say that's definitely what's caused it. But the resolution for most of them is through the civil courts, i.e., the two parties disagree who it was that's brought about the problem for the design, and they then go and get a resolution through the civil courts.
So could you tell me which legal powers are there to deal with noise?
The two types of noise that we tend to experience, or the different types of noise you tend to experience in property, tends to relate to the original source of the noise. Whichever local authority you live in, they will have a noise resolution that's published, and it tends to split into time frames, 7 o'clock in the morning till 7 at night. And that's what you probably would call daytime, and you can expect a reasonable level of noise at that to be experienced. It's not unreasonable in most instances. Then from 7 o'clock till 11 o'clock at night, the noise level that's experienced within a habitable room, that's like a bedroom or a living room, that within those rooms is slightly less. That's because it's offering a degree of protection because it's starting to get quiet, and the normal working patterns are that you would expect that to be quieter. From 11 o'clock at night till 7 in the morning, that's the quiet time. And at that stage, it's an even lower threshold that you're allowed to be causing a level of noise in a neighbouring property. To enforce those provisions, lots of different local authorities have, within Scotland, they did have lots of out-of-hours noise call services, but they also have during the day noise call services too, and that tends to be operated either by environmental health services or community safety partnerships. The powers that are available in there tend to fix immediate problems, so they're designed to stop the party, stop the stereo getting played too loud, stop the person that's fallen fast asleep drunk while the telly's been blaring. It's to bring about an immediate remedy. If you get, basically an environmental health officer gets called, they go to the complaint address, they hear the noise, they say, take some measurements and say, yeah, it's too loud, we'll go and tell them to turn the music off. They've got 15 minutes to turn it off. They don't turn it off in 15 minutes, they get a warning or get a fixed penalty notice. The fixed penalty notice is a fine. They could also get the potential that if they don't actually answer the door or they don't turn the music down, we go and get a warrant from the police, and we return with the police and we take away the noise-making equipment, or we put in place measures to stop the noise being created. So there are lots of different noises and lots of different pieces of technical guides that help inform taking forward the criminal legislation that environmental health officers have.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. This is sure to be a really interesting part of the webinar. I will let you get on and we will go back to the webinar. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Jazz, for conducting that. And to David. David here is going to join us. I'm just going to bring David and John into the webinar as well. There we go. That should be everybody. Let's wait till John gets in there. There's John. Great. So, wonderful. Just David and John, first of all, thank you so much for the presentations and for taking part today in the webinar. We've gotten a number of questions in, and I will try to get through as many as I can in the next 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes. I should say that I'll have Jazz post the email address of Under One Roof into the chat room, and it's info@underoneroof.scot. If we don't get to your questions, or if you think of some other questions afterward, please drop us an email. We are more than happy to get back to you, each and every one of you individually, and provide you with the best information or point you in the right direction of any questions or answers that we might be able to find to help you out. So if we don't get to your question today, or if you think of something a little bit later, please drop us an email and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Right, so the first question is a question probably for John, I think. It's from Robert Martin, and it was, where do you get suitable deafening material, and what are the typical costs per square meter?
Sorry, I can't tell you the cost, but Quietex can be bought from builders merchants if you contact your local building merchant. So it's not really too expensive. It's just limestone chippings. It comes in bags. You can, I mean, what the Victorian builders used was ash deafening, basically. I've also used a mixture of sand and plaster mixed together. Now, it's important to mix it together because you want it as dry as possible. So if the sand is at all wet, the plaster will help dry it out. But the Quietex is probably your best option. Sorry, I can't tell you the cost of it at the moment. No idea.
That's all right. Thanks, John. We've got a question here from Susan Hanlon. Susan says, in my experience, it takes an awful long time for complaints to be referred to environmental health. So is there a time scale or steps which have to be gone through first? This is one for you, David.
No, there's no time scale. Environmental health are sit within local authorities. And if you've got contacts in your local authority, environmental health, just contact them and they'll give you advice in confidence, just to you and your position to do with the noise aspect. If you want to come on to complain, then they'll ask about your complaint and then determine whether the best way to take it forward. I've mentioned in the questions that Jas asked me that each local authority legally had to put a resolution in place for antisocial behaviour noise. Antisocial behaviour noise is only one aspect of the whole noise nuisance issue. So if you check out your local authority's committee papers or website and look on the resolution, it's likely to mirror the same timeframes that I spoke of, but it will give you a threshold value, and they also hopefully steer you towards how you can contact them for out-of-hours services. South Lanarkshire Council does have the authority that I work for, but not the authority. I'm not here on behalf of the authority. I'm here because of the professional association asked me to come and talk to you. But my local authority's got an out-of-hours service that runs till 3 in the morning, 361 days of the year. No Christmas Eve, no Christmas Day, no Hogmanay, and no New Year's Day. But if you get an antisocial behaviour noise issue, you can call our out-of-hours service and they'll get passed through to the team that I manage at night time. And they'll get back to you straight away and say whether they can come and help you in that instance. So check your own local authority's website and check if they've got a resolution for antisocial behaviour noise. If it's another aspect, you can just ask for advice, and hopefully the environmental health officer will give you some advice or a steer.
Great, thanks, David. And then this might be one for you too. So Neen Wilson asks, will the council do sound tests if neighbours are disagreeable?
You probably saw from the acousticians that were on there that the kit that they use is pretty complicated. The tapping device, as well as the dodecahedron speaker, doesn't come at it isn't free, and the calibration standards that are expected for it, and also the certification of staff, is pretty expensive. Because the building acoustics investigation in lots of the 32 local authorities in Scotland tend to be disputes of a civil nature rather than a criminal nature, a lot of local authorities outsource that investigation if it gets to that stage. South Lanarkshire Council, fortunately, has got the kit and has got the experienced staff, but realistically would only probably do it where there was a dispute to identify to both parties that wanted to try and find what the issue was, that this is what the problem was, as in, it's pointing towards a transmission issue between upstairs flat and downstairs or through a wall, and there's nothing conspicuous or obvious that is allowing that to happen. The acoustics properties within buildings, all new properties have acoustic standards, and older properties have also got acoustic standards, and all the acoustician or the local environmental health officer, if they've got the facility to do it, is going to say this is what the test performed under those standards came out as. It's then back over to a civil issue to work out whether there's a difference between the two properties normally connected, to say who it is that's going to bring about that repair. Because being able to say who it was that had the root cause, because the building wasn't built the way it should have been built, or because, as John gave the example, the deadening or the deafening has been removed because there was a flood, or because the ceiling collapsed, or because they replaced the flooring, or a central heating system, put new pipes through. Whose fault that was or when it happens, very difficult to prove. Very difficult to prove to say that's definitely what it was. In a criminal sense, it's much better to be arbitrated through a civil, and often is. Does that answer the question? Thanks, David.
This is one for John, I think, is from Laura Alexander, and she very succinctly puts it, we have spent £600 trying to seal up gaps. Any other ideas? So in other words, that doesn't seem to be working. So John, do you have any other suggestions on that?
Well, unless you know really with the makeup of a floor, it's difficult to advise you. I don't know what age of tenement or flat you live in, but obviously if it's a modern flat, if it's a new flat, it would have had a sound test. All new flats since, I suppose, the mid-90s would have had a sound test, and we had to meet these regulations. Whereas if it was a a conversion of a tenement or a tenement rehab, it would also have to have sound tests carried out by the developer, and they would have to meet the sound test requirements, which vary for existing tenements and for new buildings, but there are limits to the sound effectiveness. So maybe the thing is to know how effective the present floor structure, if it is floor that's wrong, is, but you could only do that accurately by a sound test, and that costs money, I'm afraid. I mean, if it's between you and the flat below, well, having a floor that is isolated, either with a carpet or a laminate floor on a resilient layer, would help. If it's between you and the flat above you, well, maybe the deafening is gone, and if you can't get together with your neighbour to replace it, the only option there is to put a secondary independent ceiling up, which would destroy any cornices you had. Well, it doesn't destroy them, you just go over it and lower the ceiling, but that would probably help as well. So there are different tactics you can take depending on where you live and what the problem is. I can't say that there is one result that fits all.
Thanks, John. And John, let me follow you up on that. We did get a question in around that somebody had submitted ahead of the webinar today, asking this, which is, what do I do if I think my floorboards don't have any deafening? We had a flood a while ago, and I'm concerned that the deafening has been washed away. Yeah,
well, that's very common, and it's just that the glass wool quilt that is sometimes put down between the joists, it's really no good for impact sound. And if you want to know more about it, you should look up the Syria report on acoustic noise levels in flats. Now, I think, Mike, we could issue that under One Roof so that people could download it. It's quite available. You know, it's an easily read report which explains what different strategies are for filling these voids. I mean, you can put an acoustic glass wool quilt in, which will help a bit. It'll certainly help with airborne, but it won't help impact so much because it needs the mass. And of course, it's difficult to put sound deafening. If the deafening boards aren't there, it's very difficult because you have to put the deafening boards back. So it's hard to know how to advise unless we've really seen their property and can advise you. Sorry,
thanks, John.
Maybe I haven't answered everything. It's a difficult one.
That's all right. And if you, like I said, if it hasn't quite gotten to it, or if there's something you'd like to follow up with one of the questions that's been asked, again, drop us an email at info@underoneroof.scot, and I'll pass those on to the various experts here, and we'll get back to you on that. Question, David, from Greg Parker: is there a level that road traffic noise should not breach? I live on a noisy main road. Can the council measure traffic noise?
Yes, this probably fits in with one of the other questions that's came up on the public Q&A that I'm kind of scrolling through, and that noise tends to be, or the noise standards or expectations and the way that it's measured tends to relate to the original source noise, as I think I said in my questions, and the antisocial behaviour noise is measured in a given way, and it's measured in the room or the property that you're affected. Entertainment noise, say for instance, like from a pub or a club or anything that's nearby, entertainment noise has also got a method or a technique for measuring what someone is experiencing, and that's got a set standard. And what you're hearing within your house or within your garden can be measured by the local authority environmental health to say, okay, there's too much coming from that property, or from that business, sorry, entertainment business, and they need to cut it down. There may also be planning conditions or licensing restrictions about what level of music's allowed to be played, what time it's allowed to get played to. So that would be entertainment noise. there's also construction noise, as in if your house is next to, a building site or a coal quarry or something along that line. And again, it has its own industry standard and its method of technique and its evaluation of the likelihood for the level of noise that's getting experienced or emitted causing a problem in a neighbouring residential property. And on the road traffic question, this is where it came from, there's also industry standards for road traffic noise, in that there's road traffic, there's rail and there's aircraft noise standards. And what you're expected to hear within your property or being exposed to because of aircraft, rail or road should all be within the limits that are set in the different guides. So local authority environmental health can come and investigate it. Specific to the road traffic one, what I should say is that if a road layout has been changed in recent times, then the road traffic insulation regulations may come apply, and that puts an onus on the road operator. That might be the local authority, it might be AME or Scottish Government or Transport Scotland, whoever it did the adjustments. The onus is on them to come back and actually, to forecast whether it's going to make an impact on properties in terms of the noise. So they can do calculations to work that out. But then they have to come back at set periods. Now, don't hold me to this, but memory serves, it's 1 year after the change, 5, and then 10 years after it. And they have to come back to the owners of the properties that could potentially be affected and say, do you want noise insulation? Because we know it's kind of brought about a change in noise levels. So that there's a host of different ways that the noise levels from different noise sources can be assessed as to the likelihood of giving complaints. I hope that kind of gives you a flavour. There are lots of different standards, and your environmental health officer coming to investigate your complaint should be able to reference those particular industry standards in terms of some of those noises that I spoke about, construction, entertainment, antisocial behaviour, construction noise, aircraft, rail, road. They should be able to give you an assistance or a steer as to where to look. Hopefully that answers that question.
Thanks, David. John, I've got a question for you from Sarah. We have pillar and beam Victorian. We have a pillar and beam Victorian warehouse with sound issues throughout. Any suggestions on retrofit methods to help reduce floor and wall transition?
Well, if it's a warehouse, they wouldn't have had deafening in the floor, so it would just be timber bulk beams and floorboards held up by cast iron columns or something like that, probably. But there would be quite a height in it, so you could put an independent ceiling in. Yeah, I mean, again, is this a converted building? Because if it's a converted warehouse into a flat, then it should have had a sound test, which would have to meet the building regulation standard, which, so there should have been standard. Now, I don't know how long it was converted, so it might have been converted before anything was done. Otherwise, I think it's difficult. I mean, if you look in the void between above the ceiling, can you see the floorboards immediately above you? I expect you can, in which case there's not much you can do apart from putting additional a plasterboard, which you can get sound block plasterboard onto the existing ceiling, provided the structure is good enough to support it, and putting acoustic quilt insulation in that lowered ceiling. Sorry, without knowing again the makeup, it's difficult to advise you. Maybe if you send me a photograph or a detail, I could advise you better.
Yes, Sarah, if you, she says, Sarah did note in the chat that yes, it's converted 1990s.
Yeah, it might be before they had sound test requirements.
Yeah. Sarah, if you want to just follow up with that, just drop us an email and I'll pass it on to John. He can get back to you on that. We have a question here from Kieran. It says, hi, I own a top floor flat and have been thinking of sanding the floors. from an aesthetic preference. Can you advise if there's any best practices or lessons learned that can mitigate the impact on my downstairs neighbors if I do so? I don't want to cause any issues, but wondering if there's a good middle ground, such as insulating strips below the boards themselves.
Yeah, I mean, if you're cleaning the boards, you're presumably keep leaving them in place and you're not lifting them. If you're lifting the whole floor, yes, you could put isolating strips on the existing joists, and that would help once you put the floorboard back. But if you can't do that and you want to sand the floors, well, there's not much you can do apart from wear slippers, really. Yeah, you could put a laminate floor, which defeats the purpose of sanding your floor, really. The laminate floor could be on a resilient layer, so that might help the impact noise on your floor. It's good that you should think about your neighbour, though. I commend that.
Could I come in on that as well, Mike?
Absolutely, David.
Just to say that the culture or the design of inside of houses over the last sort of 20 years, 25 years, particularly flats, has changed towards using laminate floors and picking up carpets. It used to be that actually a sign of wealth was that you had a carpet. Nowadays, folk like the look of sanded floorboards and a flat finish or a new hardwood on top of it. And it has brought about a lot of impact noise problems for the neighbours downstairs. I would say to yourself that there's guidance on websites about use of laminate floors. There's leaflets, the Scottish Government publications, the Institute of Acoustics also publish them to give some guides about which laminates to pick, how to float the floor, a bit like John's described. There are other things as well about how you use the house yourself. You know, a hardwood floor with a family of young kids running up and down with their heavy-heeled shoes on is a lot worse than, you know, one person living on a sanded floor who just comes in, takes their shoes off at the door, goes and sits on the couch and watches a bit of telly. But the impact that it has on your neighbour, the communication aspect or the consideration of your neighbour, as John said, goes a huge way to basically mitigate how they feel about it. If it's a sudden change and they only hear it after you've done the work and you haven't told them about it, it can be reduced if you've actually said, look, I'm thinking of doing this in the flat. I just wonder how does it sound just now? See whether there's any changes in future and engage with your neighbour. Speak to them. Say, you know, is there a way to see whether it's worse before and after, and if there's something you can do about it? You know, a carpet on the bits that the noise seems to come through above their bedroom. How does your flat relate to their flat? Those things make a massive difference in terms of engagement and mediation between two parties. Is that fair, John?
Yeah, that's perfectly fair. Yeah, good point.
David, let me just follow up with you. We've got a question from Dolores that says, there is an area of subsistence in the road outside my flat. When heavy vehicles go by, there is a noise and vibration in the whole block. My neighbors are aware, and we have a group to try and get a resolution from someone. Any ideas to whom we can go to?
Well, in the first instance, go to your local authority, environmental health, and they'll tell you who it is that actually manages and operates the road. Because a road provisions covered by statutory authority, which is basically, it used to be like Crown immunity, and it's difficult to take an action against someone who's provided the road independently unless something's changed in the road to do with, like you've just described, maintenance or changing layout, because the road generates a noise and it's accepted. If the road isn't being maintained to best practicable means, then there is an avenue to encourage the road operator. That might be your local roads department or local authority. It might be, you know, Transport Scotland. It depends on the size of the road normally. But if you go to your environmental health first, they'll probably be able to tell you whether the road's an adopted road, a private road, a maintained road at a certain level, and they theoretically can put you in contact with who that operator is to bring about a change. If you've had subsidence and the the lorries are dipping, or a very common one is drain covers not being maintained. Basically, the lorry goes over the top of it and it makes a heck of a rattling noise for the metal against metal, and you can hear that in the building. So that's a maintenance issue, and it's the responsibility of the road operator to take it up. And sometimes the Environmental Health Department will be in the same service as the Roads Department, as it is within South Lanarkshire Council. And we would refer you across to the transportation manager of the roads area to say, look, this needs a repair, and it seems to be that's the root cause of the noise problem we've got. Subsidence in a road though is quite a serious thing. I would have thought the road department would have been able to see that themselves, damage to properties, or damage to the road, sorry, or vehicles going over it.
Great. Thanks, David. So we've reached the end of the webinar here. We still have about 10 or 15 questions we've not had an opportunity to get to. I would encourage everyone, if you didn't get your question answered, we will get back to each and every one of you. So just pop over to your email right now, drop us an email at info@underoneroof.scot, and we will work through all of those queries and get back to you. And also anything else in the future. We'd encourage you to pass the word to anyone else you work with, whether in the sector, family and friends. We are a free, independent organization. We are here to support the landlords, letting agents, owner-occupiers, anyone that works with people in tenement flats throughout Scotland. And very excited by the fact, of course, that we've got a couple of staff members now completely dedicated to working on that. I wanted to finally just thank David and John for taking part both in the videos and lead up to this, and also spending their time tonight taking your questions. So thank you, John. Thank you, David, for that. And to Jazz, Annie, and DB Acoustics for taking part in the video. And you can find them, just do a Google search, probably the easiest thing to do. Or any other, there's a number of other companies that do the same work. They were kind enough to lend us their time, which is why we featured them today. So we have a number of webinars coming up over the next year. We have one next Tuesday, in fact, at 6 o'clock. That's an open question and answer period. That's something new we're doing this year. So again, an opportunity that if you didn't get your question answered, you can drop us an email over there. Or sorry, you can take part in the webinar next week, which is just an hour's worth of question and answers for John and for Annie Flint, who is the co-author of the Tenements Handbook and one of the tenement experts we have here at Under One Roof. So thanks again, everyone, for taking part, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinars. Good night now.